What is the ideal gravel bike in terms of tire clearance, in terms of geometry, in terms of ride feel, and in terms of internal versus external routing? Like everything these days, the answers to those questions depends on who you ask. If you ask Pivot, now with their 4th generation of the Vault, you get some surprising, unique answers. For comfort underneath you, the IsoFlex elastomer and fiber reinforced nylon sleeve remains, but now it's lower in the frame. In terms of geometry, it's gotten long, it's progressive. All the bikes come with a stubby 70mm stem. The frame is suspension corrected. It's quite slack with tall stack. And not just the stems that are stubby. The 4th generation has gone with a short crank trend. The smaller sizes get 170mm cranks and the largest 2 bikes get 172.5 cranks. In terms of the internal versus external routing question, Pivot answers yes. In that you can run it however you like. You can run your brake hoses externally or internally. In this video, I'll tell you what I like about this bike, what I do not like about this bike, and how the Pivot compares to other bikes in terms of geometry, in terms of ride feel, and in terms of cost. This review has been a long time in the works. Pivot sent me this bike right after I smashed up my shoulder about a year ago, and it took me a while to get to the bike. Since then, Pivot has upgraded some of the parts options, so I'll focus mostly on the frame here. It takes me a while to get through these things. I've got a Refugio from Stinner here. I've got a 51 in the back. It takes me a while. Thanks for your patience. If you're new to this channel, welcome. So you know, I'm not trying to sell you one of these bikes. I'm not trying to dissuade you from buying one of these bikes. I am not financially supported by the bike brands that I test. Instead, I'm supported by sponsors, which are listed in the video description of each of my videos below. I encourage you, as always, to follow the money. It's a good thing, whether you're looking at reviews, you're looking at news, think about where the financing is coming from. And I'm happy to have the support of sponsors like Castelli, who've been taking care of me for a couple years and allow me to do this. So with that aside, let's jump in and talk about the 4th generation Pivot Vault. So in the yays versus nays on this bike, let's start with the yays. Here's the stuff that I dig. I like comfort. I like the compliance, both at the back and the front. The back is a unique thing for Pivot. It's got what they call the IsoFlex, which is a 6-inch sleeve of tuned elastomer and fiber reinforced nylon. So what this feels like to ride is a nice soft carbon post with a bit of a damper to it. Previous iterations of the Vault had this, but it sat a little bit higher above the frame and it looked almost like a dropper post. This looks a little more subtle, but the soft ride remains. There's a wee bit of a weight penalty with the complete bike adding up to about 18 pounds or so, but it's certainly not anywhere in the lines of full suspension bike like the Trek Checkout that I rode at 26 pounds, or even like a Thud Buster or any dedicated suspension post. So it's just a nice happy medium of a cushiony ride without a lot of complexity or weight. Up front, similarly, the bike feels nice in the combination of the long reach, short stem, and a fork that has been redesigned to have a bit more give to it. Pivot tested a number of competitors' forks and found the Open to have the flexiest fork out there. They didn't go quite that far. They were afraid they would add a little torsional twist if you added that much compliance to it, but there's a noticeable softness to the front end. The bike has a decidedly more tranquilo feel than the 3rd generation Vault that I raced at BWR Arizona a couple years back. That one was built up with a Shimano Dura-Ace 2x group, and it felt more like, you know, it was a cross bike, which was the origins of the Vault originally. So it's a little stiffer, a little twitchier. Not a bad bike, but certainly a different feel and vibe than this current Vault, which is, you know, more for riding outside the tape than tight lines inside the cyclocross tape. One thing I did not feel, but I appreciate, is that Pivot does size-specific carbon layups for each frame. I'm a pretty generic average guy. I ride the size 56 frame, or, you know, often that's like a medium, medium-large, somewhere in there. And some bikes will do layups across the board for all the different sizes, so the small ones end up being stiffer and the large ones end up being a little flexier. Pivot does a good job of having separate layups for each frame size. Not exclusive to Pivot by any means. You know, Specialized and Trek and others do something similar, but that's always a positive thing. Internal and external routing. I like this idea. I love how internal routing looks. I do not love working on fully internal routed bikes or traveling with them. One other downside to internal routed bikes is, as I mentioned, it's hard to work on them. So if you don't know your exact fit and you get in a bike that is built up fully internal, it can be very difficult, if not, I don't want to say impossible. It can be a challenge and an expensive challenge to just fiddle with your fit with this configuration. When something's external, it's a little bit easier. So one potential scenario I see with a bike like this is you could get it in externally routed, get it fit as best you feel, and then make some adjustments as you go to see what is ideal for you. And then once you have that fit, then if you like the internal look, then you could have it redone as an internal routing. So I think it's a cool thing. It's good, options are good, right? And this is the only bike I know of in the gravel space that allows you to have your cake and eat it too in terms of the routing choices. Bike has 50 millimeters of tire clearance, which is kind of the new standard now. No, it doesn't take the 2.2s with adequate clearance on either side. So I know some of you will be up in arms about that. But 50 is kind of the new standard for clearance, and I found that to be perfectly adequate for riding around here in Boulder, Colorado. I like the looks of the thing. Looks are important. Fit, functionality, fashion are all important things to a bike, and how you feel about it, including how it looks, is a critical thing. I like how this bike looks. Speaking of feel, touch points are key, and the zip bar is one of my faves for sure, in that it's wide enough at the top to disperse some of the pressure across your palms, but not so wide that you're inclined to run your thumbs over the top, which is a no-no. That's a rule of thumb in my book, and you can still run your thumbs underneath, but there's a nice wide perch. Good transition to the hoods. I love how this bar feels. That plus some nice cushy tape, and you're halfway to good comfort. The other half is where we'll divert to the nays of this bike. I do not like the WTB saddle. It's just a little too skinny for my particular physiology. Your mileage may vary. I don't like this saddle. Similarly, I don't really like the WTB tires. They come in a skinny 40 stock. I also put on some 45s that Pivot sent, which felt a bit better. Plus sides to the WTB tires, and part of why they have such wide adoption across original equipment specification out there on many brands is that they're pretty sturdy, right? You're not gonna flat as often as you would on a thinner and perhaps more supple feeling tire. I prefer something that's a little more supple, so they're not bad tires, they're just not super soft or quick rolling tires. And where the rubber meets the road is a critical part of how a bike feels, so I would love to see a higher end tire on this bike. I'd also love to see a power meter. Many of you don't care about that, but I enjoy being able to quantify my fun while I'm out there. So you can add one, but none of the builds come with a power meter. Now let's do some comparisons to other bikes. 50 mil, as I mentioned, is basically the new standard for tire clearance on most gravel bikes. And this guy, the Pivot Vault 4th Gen, is straight up the middle there. In terms of gearing, you've got three options. You've got a 1x12 Shimano GRX option. You've got the transmission 1052, the big old cassette end derailleur in the back. And you've got the SRAM Explorer, the 13-speed. 1046 in the back. For those latter two, it comes with a 40 ring, which is pretty stock now across the board for SRAM 1x-spec bikes. You can fit up to a 46 tooth ring if you like. While the fork is softer for a rigid bike, it is a rigid fork, and if you want to soften up the ride further with a suspension fork, you can do so because the geometry is suspension corrected, which means they've added in enough space that when you put on a fork, it won't tip the entire bike back and slack out the front angle. 415 is the measurement they quote. That's maybe a little shy of the recommended 430 millimeters, but that is enough to squeeze in a 40 mil travel fork like the Rudy or the Fox without totally kertwanging the geometry. So that's a plus. Speaking of geometry, the bike is a little more relaxed up front than many gravel bikes. 70.8 is the head tube angle figure of the large bike that I rode. That definitely puts it on the slacker end. Most gravel bikes these days are somewhere in the 71 and up range, 71 and change. There are, of course, bikes that are slacker, like the Lauf Sigla, for instance. the Icelandic brand that takes a big old fat tire. That guy is in the 70.5 head tube range with a healthy amount of trail. You know, the trail is how far out the center of the hub sits from the contact patch. Most trail figures are, you know, sub 70, like upper 60s for gravel bikes. That Laufsiegel has a 76 trail figure, which is pretty substantial. What that trail figure does is makes it feel more stable when you're going downhill at speed. The downside to this is that when you're on pavement or just firm dirt, it can feel a little floppy, like when you're standing up out of the saddle climbing. So like with everything on a bike, it's all about a balance. So this skews a little bit towards the stabler side of things. The Santa Cruz Stigmata, another suspension corrected geo, another slacked out geo, another progressively long top tube with the short stem on the stock bikes. That bike is a 69.5 degree head tube. So there are certainly bikes on the progressive slack end of the geometry spectrum out there, but not as many as in the 71 and slightly steeper range. So there are bikes that feel very similar up front, done so by angles. There are a few bikes that feel soft and damped in the back, but there are none that do so with the IsoFlex. Trek has the similarly titled Iso Speed decoupler on many of its gravel bikes. What that means is that there's a pivot point, you know, in the seat post, seat mast line that allows the whole thing to flex a bit and give you some cushiness. This moves a bit. I pressed pivot for a quantification of this, like a number. How much does this thing move, right? Like I just tested the Pinarello Gravel F and the Pinarello Dogma GR, and those move a centimeter and 8 mil respectively, according to Pinarello. Your mileage may vary depending on how much you weigh and how hard you hit bumps, but they can put a number on that. Pivot declined to put a number on how much the post moves, but in addition to a bit of movement of the carbon post, there is, you know, the nylon and elastomer sheath around the post that adds a little bit of damping to it. So it's not just flailing around. I'm obviously exaggerating how much it moves, but it's not just the movement, but there's a bit of movement, and that movement is damped, if you would. So it makes for a pleasant ride. It makes for a much more pleasant ride, in my experience, when you put on a comfy saddle. So I swapped out the saddle and was much happier with that fit overall. But the back end is a unique solution from Pivot, and in my humble estimation, a good one. Storage. All the gravel bikes these days, seemingly all the gravel bikes these days, have to have a storage, right? Have to, must have. And it can be a nice thing. I am jaded in that I'm constantly switching bikes, and getting the ideal configuration and packing order for these things is vital to it being able to go in and come out smoothly. And I lack the patience often to find that for each bike. And so often I'll just stick on a saddlebag and call it good. However, I know it's a feature that many folks are interested in, and the Pivot Vault is fine, right? It's a decent size, and the cage door is sturdy, which is not always the case. So it's done pretty well. It's not as big as, I think the Diverge is probably the largest that I've tested in terms of the total volume, and then also just the door size, which makes getting stuff in and out easier. So I think Diverge has set the high bar there. This down tube size kind of dictates how big the storage can be. This is fine. It's not the best, it's not the worst, it's fine. In terms of pricing, it's not the absolute cheapest out there. It's not a consumer direct bike like a Canyon or the Propane that I've been testing and been quite impressed with. Review on that is coming up. Pretty decent value for these bikes, relatively speaking. So on the whole, the Pivot Vault 4th Gen, it's a good, comfortable bike with multiple options. Internal or external, you can do that. Rigid fork, which is a softer fork, but a rigid fork or a suspension fork, you can have that choice too. I really appreciate how this new bike rides in terms of geometry and comfort and tire clearance. I don't like the particular tires or the saddle, but those things are easy enough to change. And I dig the fact that you can go internal or external in terms of your routing. Let me know what questions you have. I'll do my best to answer them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and thanks for doing yourself a favor by getting out there and enjoying the ride.